we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky all up in your podcast. It's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Sachs. Thank you so much for pressing play. Joining me this week is returning guest, Dr. Victor Raymond, also known as my friend Victor. And we're going to be talking about a really interesting writer that I think needs more exposure out there. He has some exposure, but given his talent, I want to talk about this. Victor had reached out to me a while back and said, "Hey, there's this friend of mine who's also a writer. I would love to do a podcast with you about it sometime." I said, "Sure, sounds great." Mm-hmm. And so last year at North Texas RPG Con, you came up and said, and you handed me 3 of his books. And so I've gotten exposed to his writing. It's really good. But that's what we're going to be talking about this week. And also because Victor is on the foundation of the Tékumel Foundation, we'll get a quick update on Tékumel. Longtime listeners will know that we've covered Tékumel more than once with Victor. So with all that being said, Victor, introduce yourself again to maybe people who haven't heard you on the show before, and then tell us a little bit about our topic.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Victor Raymond, right? As Shane was just talking about. And what we're going to be talking about today, the who we're going to be talking about, is the writer, my now deceased friend, John M. Ford, and known to his friends as Mike. So if you hear me referring to Mike, I'm really talking about John Ford, the writer. So not John Ford, the movie director, not John Ford, the Jacobean playwright, but John Ford, the fantasy writer. So
Amazon, or not Amazon, man, I'm correcting myself all like crazy already. Wikipedia describes him as an American science fiction and fantasy writer, game designer, and poet. But
yep.
He's a real character. I love reading about him. He was just a real character. I wish I could have met him.
Well, Mike was an amazing guy. I had the great good fortune to be his friend for about 20 years, and during that time, I had a chance to game with him, to help him with his writing, to be around, to help him out, deal with all sorts of stuff. It was an interesting time for me. This is roughly the same time period that I also knew Professor M.A.R. Barker, the creator of the world of Tékumel. And I, in fact, actually know quite a few other people who are of, I don't know, some note. And I was lucky to have that happen when it did, as it did. I was living in the Twin Cities for most of that time. And some of that time, I also was living in Iowa as I was going to graduate school for my doctorate.
So before we go further with Mike, aka John M. Ford, do you have any just real quick elevator pitch style Tékumel updates? I know that you've been seeing chatter.
Yes.
There's stuff happening.
Yes. Yeah, there's a couple of things that are coming on. One of them is a really great reprint of a previously published Tékumel product, Deeds of the Ever-Glorious, which is a history of the legions of the Empire of the Petal Throne. And this was originally published back in the early 80s. It is a chronicle of the history of the legions of Solyanu. We're reprinting it now with a new cover, new illustrations, colorized illustrations, new afterword, edited index, a whole bunch of new things that'll make it actually, I think, very useful for gaming at the game table, for using at the game table. And the other thing that's coming along is a new product. It's called Sharetalial, and there won't be a test on your Soleani pronunciation. Just we'll go with that. The subtitle of which is "The Canon of the Establishment of Blessed Memory," and this book, a new book, is written by Giovanna Freni, who is one of our board members, and Professor Barker. This is a long time in coming for a bunch of different reasons, but what it's about is the view of other planar beings and their abilities from the viewpoint of the gods of stability. So most Tékumel fans are probably aware of the Book of Ebon Bindings, which is a book of demonology and very cool, but pretty much written from a change perspective. This is kind of the complementary view from the stability side, and that'll be coming out relatively soon now. But yeah, they're both. I'm really excited to talk about them because they're really cool things. People will want to pick them both up if they're Tékumel fans.
All right, and Tékumel is a incredibly cool setting, very rich world building, very rich. It's too much to get into in a quick snippet here on this podcast, but I do have some other Tékumel podcasts. If people want to go, just search Tékumel and Shane Plays, and you'll find those for an introduction to a really, really amazing, not only game, tabletop role playing game, but just a world, a really lush, deeply developed, fascinating. Today they call it world building, setting, all that. Really fascinating stuff. So, all right, moving on to John M. Ford, or Mike, as you knew him. So I'm just going to throw a couple of things out here just to kind of give people an idea of the kind of interesting person that he was. So, as we already said, Wikipedia kind of summed him up, and he's so much more than this. But as an American science fiction and fantasy writer, game designer, and poet, he won. I love this. He won a World Fantasy Award for a Christmas card.
Yes.
Because evidently he was famous among his friends for these Christmas cards and updates that he would send out. He would put little poems and things in them, and so he won a poem, or I won a World Fantasy Award for a poem that he put in a Christmas card called "Winter Solstice Camelot Station." He wrote what's considered one of the first cyberpunk novels before cyberpunk was a thing, called Web of Angels. And he was married in a self-scripted Klingon ceremony at a game convention. So he was Neil Gaiman. It's Gaiman. He was friends with Neil Gaiman. He was friends with Robert Jordan of Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan's actually a pen name, but
Jim Rigney.
Right. He became very close to Jim Rigney, aka Robert Jordan, and his wife. Other well-known, people in the fantasy writing world or whatever held him in high regard and considered him a friend. And the general conventional wisdom is that if he would have followed the normal way, quote unquote, that people do, like build a world and then put several books in it, he'd probably be as big as George R.R. Martin. But he liked to follow his own nose, from what I can tell, and write things that interested him, not just camp out on something to make money. So I'm not saying George R.R. Martin is just camping out on his world to make money. I'm just saying that John M. Ford follows his nose. Like after dropping a huge fantasy novel, he might go up and write a historical fiction novel or something. He wrote the stuff that he found interesting. So anyway, that's just a few of the little tidbits that I wanted to kind of season, let people know right off the bat. This isn't your normal. He was just a character. I wish I would have met him. He sounds like a real character. So what else can you tell us there, Victor?
Well, Mike Oh goodness, this is trying to sum up Mike in a few words is almost impossible. Mike had a tremendous apprehension that people would find him boring, which all of his friends thought was quite possibly one of the most amazingly, just I mean that anyone would find Mike boring was considered to be just the craziest thing that anyone would have ever imagined. Mike was brilliant. He was a creative genius. I'm relatively lucky in that sense in having known him for as long as I did, for as closely as I did. Yeah, he wrote what he thought was interesting. He wrote extensively, and unfortunately was estranged from his family in many ways. At the memorial that we had for Mike after he died, I was one of 6 people who, shared our memories of him. That included Jim Rigney, Robert Jordan. It also included Neil Gaiman. It also included a number of other people. And you know, we did our absolute best, and yet there was no possible way we could have summed up even a fraction of what made Mike unique.
So was this the same memorial where, like, the only person from his family that showed up was his aunt, or was that a different?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
So who evidently, she thought he was great. Yeah, there's a good. I'm going to link on the show notes for this podcast. So go to shameplays.com. Obviously, I'll link the Wikipedia entry, which covers some stuff. But there's an excellent article from Slate by Isaac Butler. So this is a journalist who read one of his books. Well, actually, what happened was, I feel like this happens a lot. It kind of happened like this with me and you, Victor, where he was out to lunch or something with a friend, and his friend said, "You've really got to read this book," and handed him The Dragon Waiting,
Mm-hmm.
which rang his bell. He's like, "I can't believe, who is this author? This is amazing. I've never read anything like it." Started research, said none of his books are in print. Started doing research on the background of John M. Ford. Found out about the dynamics between, his family and his friends, and somehow through that journalistic investigation, the fuse was lit that the books were starting to get published again, because at that point none of his books were in print, which Isaac Butler, this journalist, thought was practically a crime because John M. Ford was so good. But I will link that article as well on the show notes at shameplays.com. I think it's well worth reading.
Yeah, I should note that Beth Meacham, as an editor at Tor, now Reactor, I think, at Tor Books, Beth, who is a friend of mine, who is a friend of Mike's, Beth was instrumental in getting Mike's work back into print.
Excellent. I'm glad, because I want to read more of his books. I'm not always in a situation where I can drop $200 on a paperback. Although I think his stuff is good enough that it's worth it. You've never read it. If you've never read a John M. Ford book, I guarantee you've never read anything like it. So before we get into some of his books and maybe which are your favorite or not or whatever, how did you meet Mike?
That's actually rather funny. Mike was a part of the science fiction fantasy writers scene in the Twin Cities in the, I guess it would be the late 80s, mid to late 80s. At that time, I was working, doing nonprofit work in the Twin Cities, but I was also a volunteer and department head for MiniCon, the annual convention of the Minnesota Science Fiction Society or Science Fiction Society. No, I mean, Minicon is that convention, but MinStiff is the organization behind it. Like so many fan-run conventions, there's a nonprofit that does things the rest of the year, and Minicon was its annual get-together. And it had been growing quite significantly through the 80s and into the 90s. And so as a result, there were a fair number of writers in the Twin Cities at the time. And, between science fiction fandom and knowing some of the writers through that, I was part of a group of friends that got together at a house every couple of weeks to basically read Shakespeare aloud. We would do Reader's Theater Shakespeare. And that would involve picking a play and then, getting together at Pamela and David's house. And usually, it wasn't always, but usually it was at Pamela and David's house. And we would then get together, bring our copies of the plays, and divide up the parts, and then read them. And each of us taking on the roles of the different characters in each of the plays. And that was a tremendous amount of fun. But Mike was part of that. And I had known about Mike, and in fact had known enough about his writing to be rather already a bit in awe of him. When Pamela at one point said, "Oh, Mike wants to talk to you." And I was like, "What? what, did I do something?" And Pamela was like, no, he wants to talk to you. And as it turns out, Mike was a science fiction writer, but he was also a gamer. And when he arrived in the Twin Cities, all of his friends were other science fiction writers. Most of them were not gamers. So he didn't really have anyone to talk to about gaming stuff until I came along. I mean, this is not completely true. I mean, there are other friends that, he stayed in touch with. He was very close friends with Lauren Wiseman, who is the editor of the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society and worked with Steve Jackson Games for a very long time. So, I mean, it's not like he didn't have anybody, but he didn't have anybody there. And so I was one of the people he could talk about gaming to and would get his jokes. And Mike was very much a fan of the if you know kind of joke, right? And yeah, so we started hanging out. He was also a model railroad fan. He worked long and hard on putting together a model railroad set up in his apartment, and I actually ended up helping him do some of the work for that. His partner, Elise Matheson, was an old friend of mine, still is a friend of mine, and Elise and her other partner, John, and they lived in the house that was just north of where I lived, where Lynn, my partner, and I lived in South Minneapolis. So, yes, there was a whole bunch of us living in relatively close proximity to one another in Minneapolis, and some of us in St. Paul too. But that's how I got to know him.
That's cool. So yeah, that's a good segue to also talk about some of his gaming work. I mean, I imagine most of what we'll talk about today will be his novels, but he did do quite a bit with GURPS. You
Yes.
mentioned Steve Jackson Games. He worked with Traveler. He did some. He wrote at least one adventure, if not more, for the Paranoia role playing game, which I love Paranoia.
Not just any adventure for the Paranoia role-playing game, but the Charles Roberts award-winning adventure, The Yellow Clearance Black Box Blues. Yeah, that was which has so many in-jokes, so many sly references, so many just side-splittingly funny moments in it. It's almost more fun to read than it is to run as a game.
It.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be fun, but it takes somebody who has a deft sense of timing to make that adventure work.
Well, it's Paranoia is a joy. The concept of Paranoia seems like a perfect fit from what I understand about John M. Ford and his sense of humor.
Yeah.
So Paranoia, real quick, if somebody listening to this doesn't know, I think it's being published in a new version, new edition today, but it came out in the 80s, I believe, from West End Games. And you basically lived inside a domed. It presented itself as a utopia, but it was a dystopia run by a crazy computer, and it was almost so certainly you were going to die that you had a certain amount of clones for each adventure, and then and in fact, if it was a tougher adventure, they might say this is a 5-clone adventure, not a 3-clone adventure. But it had a really great sense of humor. It was a hilarious game. So,
well, I mean, I think it's probably best that everyone understand properly what Paranoia is. Paranoia is a was and is a technically post-apocalyptic game where you all grow up as citizens of Alpha Complex, and all right-thinking citizens play Paranoia. And remember, the computer is your friend.
The computer is your friend. To kind of the computer's outlook on thing. I remember in the I think it was in the first edition. I don't know if it was an adventure or the rule book or whatever. It showed this. I think they called them troubleshooters. I can't remember what you were called.
Yes,
yeah, so you're a troubleshooter, right. And this troubleshooter's like hanging off a ledge for dear life with maybe some stuff on his utility belt. And the computer is like, here's an example of a troubleshooter unnecessarily endangering the computer's equipment or
valuable
or
computer equipment.
Yeah. So that was that was how the computer looked at things. So
that's right.
Yeah.
There's a display. What is it? Something to the effect of 2 + 2 does not equal 4. 2 + 2 equals 5.394728. Please adjust all of your equipment calibration accordingly.
Yeah. It also, Paranoia is what taught me the Roy G. Biv color system.
Yes.
Red, orange, yellow, green.
The lowest ranking citizens of Alpha Complex are infrareds, and the Ward High programmers are ultraviolets. So there you go.
So it ran through instead of leveling up, you became a different color. And you were less susceptible to certain laser types. Anyway, wonderful game.
Yeah, perhaps your next clone will do better.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yes.
Wonderful game. So I can see John. I've got to go track this down now because I can see John M. Ford's sense of humor just perfect. I mean, it's peanut butter and chocolate leading to Reese's. It's just perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he also wrote a Star Trek 3 solitaire game set for West End Games called the Sherwood Syndrome. He did several supplements for GURPS. Go ahead.
Right, probably one of the best one of the best source books for time travel for any game system, but particularly for GURPS, his GURPS Time Travel that he wrote with Steve Jackson. GURPS Time Travel is a tour de force, and it's like people say, what are you talking about? It's like, no, if you wanted to think about what it would be like, what it means to be running a time travel oriented game, you want GURPS Time Travel. Now this gets a little expanded with GURPS Infinite Worlds, which his material was added to by Steve Jackson and Ken Hite. But no, the GURPS Time Travel was amazing. So,
well, I got to give a shout out in addition to that for GURPS supplements in general. A lot of them are just great, no matter what system you're playing. For
oh
example,
yeah,
right after
absolutely.
their
Mhm.
zombies source book is amazing, just good. They go into all the different kinds of techno zombies to Romero zombies, traditional what they were before Romero, and they're written so well that you can use them for any game system. So
Yeah, I highly recommend any of the GURPS source books for literally any of the stuff they've done for either third or fourth edition GURPS. Particularly there's such an array for third edition
right.
material, just to go for it. Yeah.
So he wrote Scared Stiffs with Bill, is it Slavicek? Slavicek. I don't want to mispronounce
Oh,
that.
yeah, Slavicek. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
for Ghostbusters, and that's also kind of a whimsical, fun, eye winky kind of game. So I bet you that was a fun adventure. Um, and Ghostbusters, quick trivia, was the first dice pool system. So
Yeah.
credit to
That's
credit
good.
to West End Games. Oh, are you going to correct me,
No,
or is that?
no, 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 no.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Uh, nice. So now people can stick that in their back pocket as a little bit of trivia. Um, and I'm really going to camp out on these last two bullets. Uh, Ford wrote information concerning the Klingons for fastest Star Trek tabletop role playing game. And then he also it's so one of his books that he wrote,
The final.
Final Reflection, is one of
Yeah.
the best. I don't think canon has adopted it, all of it, but it's one of the best Klingon. I mean, it's just so good how he dives into uh, how he writes the Klingon culture and their way of thinking, um, including, I mean, coming up with like uh, language stuff that's really
Mhm.
really great. And then along with that, he created a chess like game called is it Klinzaw?
Yeah,
Kleinzaw?
Klinja. Yeah,
Klinja,
Klinja.
which is a chess-like game that it's like Klingon chess. It's kind of a rough analogy that he used in the Final Reflection. Playing
Yeah.
games and the thinking that goes around strategy games factors in a lot with the Final Reflection.
Well, the interesting thing about all of this is that Mike was a Star Trek fan, like so many of us back in the day. But he found it kind of an interesting challenge, as it were. How could the Klingon Empire be so successful when they get stereotyped as being, you know, how would you say, bloodthirsty head thumpers that are not very, they don't seem like they're smart enough to have an interstellar empire. And so the final reflection, Mike wrote that very much as to answer that question. How was that possible? How did they get that way? And he wrote it from the Klingon perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find yourself rooting for the Klingons even when they're in conflict with Federation because it's completely from the perspective of the Klingons.
Yeah, there's a note. He wrote the final reflection, which Klingon fandom says that's us. Thank you very much. No matter what Paramount wants to say,
Right.
which is interesting. Um, but it's also, I mean, you mentioned some of the things about Klingon language. Mike wrote the final reflection before Mark Okrand had gotten done writing the Klingon language books. And so, unfortunately, what Mike was doing in the final reflection doesn't necessarily match up with what Okrand did with Klingon as a language. But there's some interesting moments in the final reflection, like it's very much he inserts himself into his own book, right? As he's writing as if he were a 23rd century author trying to track down what exactly happened back in the day with this, diplomatic conference, right?
Yeah, the
And
last Babel conference that was on Earth.
right.
where there was a chance that the Federation might dissolve.
Right.
They call it the dissolution Babel.
Right.
And it's important to note, it's set pre-Kirk. It's not, they're just starting to talk about dilithium as the antimatter reaction for faster warp engines. Transporter technology is still somewhat new.
Yeah. There, there's an interesting moment in there where uh, the Klingons already had transporter technology, probably because their margins of error were bigger. They
had larger acceptable margins of error. That's correct.
margins of error, and the Federation in the book, well, we've just developed this brand new technology, and the Klingons are asked what do you think of that? And our main character, as he activates their transporter technology, says our scientists will find it very interesting. They will want to know why yours makes that terrible
Yeah,
noise.
why is yours so loud? Yeah, that's terrible for boarding parties. It's so loud. Yeah.
So,
So the Klingon, I'm not going to give away. There's so much in this book that telling anecdotes out of the book really doesn't give away anything, because he can pack one page can cover so much. I mean, there's so much going on in this book.
and don't forget that he also wrote another Star Trek novel, which remains the only very light comic opera set in the Star Trek universe, as far as I know.
How Much for Just the Planet?
How Much for Just the Planet?
Which I've read The Dragon Rating, and I've read Final Reflection. I'm savoring waiting to get to How Much for Just the Planet.
Well, and How Much for Just the Planet is it's very interesting, because also a lot of those friends that I mentioned that I knew, they were, I got to know Mike after he finished How Much for Just the Planet, but many of our mutual friends appear in those books, Tuckerized. That is to say, they appear, and if you know who they are, you know who they are. So
that must be fun to see yourself in a book like that. But yeah, so taking it back, talking about him sort of inserting himself into the Final Reflection. So there's a foreword to the book from the quote unquote author's perspective.
Right.
Where he says, what you're about to read is a fictionalized version of the facts that I was able to put together by interviewing people and whatnot. So he's presenting it as a history that is factually based. But yeah, I love you're talking about the transporter thing, because the Klingons are there, and they're like special guests on Earth. And the last day, the Federation goes out of their way to make this big announcement. We have transporters now, and it's meant to impress the Klingons, right? And the Klingons are looking at each other like, yeah, that's great and everything. So the Empire will be glad to know that. But there's so much, and it's interesting because even though it's written from the Klingons' perspective, it's just drenched in the Klingon way of thinking.
Yes.
It doesn't try to say, now you got to understand this is how Klingons think. And it's from the Klingons' perspective. You either get that or you don't while you're reading it.
I have to admit that from a gaming perspective, if I'm ever running a Star Trek game, I simply tell my players that the Klingons are Mike Ford's and the Romulans are by Diane Duane. And if you haven't read Diane Duane's series of novels about the Romulans, I made the recommendation for Mike Ford. I will make this recommendation for Diane Duane.
I've read some of her stuff, obviously. I know she wrote Spock's World and
Doctor's Orders. And
Doctor's Orders is really good. I've only got one beef with Doctor's Orders. I know we're talking about John M. Ford, but I got to throw it out here. So it's a great book. I love it. One of the things I love about it is it goes much more into what a first contact is, or what the follow up to a first contact, where they're going down and trying to get to know a species better and what all that means. But for whatever reason, I can't remember why Bones gets put in charge of the ship.
That's right. It's kind of a, how can we make that happen? Well,
Right.
you know,
This way. So Bones is in charge. And while all this other stuff is going on, a starship combat happens. And I've heard most people think that is the most realistic depiction of starship combat in a Star Trek novel. I mean, it's very technical and strategic. I just when I read that, I was like, how would Bones know to do starship combat so well? That's my only beef with that book, but it's a great book.
He's got greater depths to him. Probably Mike was friends with Diane. I know Diane. I'm friends with Diane and her late husband, Peter Morwood. Probably one of the reasons why that was such a realistic starship combat was that Diane's husband, who was a friend of Mike's and mine and other people, Peter Morwood, was a former Royal Air Force pilot and a science fiction writer and fantasy writer in his own right.
Well, and we'll get back. I want to take this almost immediately back to John M. Ford, but
okay,
like when we're talking about realistic starship combat, like Bones would be like, okay, we've taken our shot, they've taken theirs. Call me in 4 hours when we're lined up again, because of all the physics involved, and that kind of thing. So, which is obviously when you're having a fast-paced TV show or movie, you're not going to do all that. They're going to fight more like fighters,
right,
like jet fighters and stuff. So,
yeah.
Anyway, all right. So back to John and Ford. Yeah, the final reflection is amazing, and he does a good job of the Klingons just assuming that the Federation's totally weak. They don't carry weapons. What are they thinking about? What is going on? And but then the main characters start seeing little elements of, I don't get it, but they have some strength to them. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me, but they're showing. And then he comes to determine the Federation is scared of different things than Klingons are, right? Mm-hmm. And so like they're amazed. There's 2 Klingons on planet Earth, and they see like a bunch of protesters get together all in one place, and none of them have weapons. And that's mind-boggling to the Klingons, because on Klingon or wherever, somebody would just come along and blow them all up because they're all in one place and they're defenseless. So it's very interesting. You do get a couple of cameos. Spock's in it. It doesn't come right out and say Spock, but if you put 2 and 2 together, you know it's Spock. And then I don't know. I couldn't figure out if it was Bones's father or grandfather. I think maybe it was his father.
I think so. I'd have to go back and look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But anyway, final reflection is amazing. Check it out. And one other thing I want to say before we go into any of his other books, one of the rich things about reading John M. Ford, which will probably confuse or frustrate people at the beginning until they realize what's going on and then start kind of looking at it from that perspective. A lot of what happens in John M. Ford novels, you have to get through inference.
Yes.
He does not come out and spell things out for you. In fact, I've read more than one quote where he said he's allergic or horrified by the obvious, something like that.
Yeah. There was a moment, one of the novellas that eventually got published as a Tor double called Fugue State. You can go look that up, Fugue State. It had originally appeared as I forget which magazine it had appeared in, as a somewhat shorter work. And another writer that was a friend of mine and who I knew and was Joel Rosenberg, not the current sort of techno thriller writer, but the science fiction writer from back in the day. And
Now, did he not write the Sleeping Dragon?
yes,
Sleeping Dragon. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that's one of my favorite books when
yes,
I was younger. Yeah,
yeah. No, Joel and Mike and I and various other people would get together and hang out. But Joel, when Mike got the contract from Tor to produce it as a Tor double, Mike, basically let us all know that he was going to be doing some revisions, for the book publication, and Joel said, "So you'll be taking out some of the ambiguities in the original?" And Mike replied, "No, I'm putting more in."
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's evidently there was exchanges with that, like, editors as well, and he's like, no, I'm not doing that. That's and it's one of the hallmarks of how it engages your brain on a different level when everything's not being spelled out for you. Like I said at the beginning, it can be a little like I found myself flipping back pages and moving like, did I miss something or whatever? And then I
Uh-huh.
understand, okay, he's not spelling everything out. There's
Nope.
stuff happening off scene here, just like in real life, that is affecting events and behavior. Uh, but once I got that, I was like, okay, cool. And then I just understood. But there are people, like I said, you got to infer a lot of things. He's not going to spell it out for you. A character may come in one scene with a motivation and agree to do this and that and be acting a certain way. And then the next scene they're in, their motivation is completely different or they're acting differently. And you're like, why? Well, it's because stuff happened off scene, but he drops enough detail that if you put two and two together, you can figure out that, something happened off scene. There was another
The
meeting or something.
the games he ran with us were like that as well. We spent most of our time as a gaming group trying very hard to figure out what the hell was going on. And this was a gaming group that included, there were, various friends of mine from the Twin Cities. This included um, my friend Martin Schaefer, Eileen Lufkin. It also included Cara Dalkey, who's a published writer, Stephen Bruce, who's a published writer, Pamela Dean, who's a published writer. I mean, there was a bunch of us that were all gaming with Mike. Oddly enough, Joel's wife Felicia played with us. Then wife Felicia, she's remarried since Joel passed away as well. But Joel never played with us, and but that's a different story, different time. But yeah, we would get done with gaming sessions with Mike where we were like, I think I understood what just happened. What do you think? And we would spend almost as much time after the game processing what Mike had presented us with as we did in the game. So, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's rich. There's a lot going on. I read somebody else described these moments in his novels as iceberg passages because you're only seeing about a tenth of what's happening.
Yes.
It's like an
Yeah.
iceberg. The rest of
Yeah.
it's through the
Yeah.
surface. So he went as far as say like any John M. Ford novel you're reading, only about 10% of it is above the surface.
You definitely have to go back and reread it in order to understand what you actually just read.
And I mean, the dragon waiting now. The Final Reflection, which is the Klingon Star Wars novel we've been talking about, there was some of that, but the dragon waiting is just. I mean, it's definitely an iceberg novel. There's so much going on that it's like here's a perfect example. And let's shift over into the dragon waiting, which is a historical fiction / fantasy novel that set in the time of the War of the Roses in England. So you had, is it Richard III?
Mm-hmm.
and there's always been that mystery of what happened to the two
The
princes in
Princess
the
in the
tower.
Tower.
Yeah, so a lot of that's going on, but not everything. But it's definitely around, is it Richard III, uh, and all of this stuff that's historically based. But then there's also a fantasy element, and he's introducing these other characters that are all kind of in the mix. And there's magic in this version.
Mm-hmm.
There's vampires. It's a very
It,
unique type of vampirism, which I thought was interesting. I really loved how he handled. Like, you could be a vampire, and as long as you were useful, people might not try to kill you. Right? It wasn't just like you're this undead thing stalking the night, and they
right.
were automatic. So if you could prove useful, then you could keep yourself alive.
It
Um,
is the Dragon Waiting is a completely plausible, interesting examination of a world that is utterly different from ours, but feels as though you're right there.
right. It's fascinating. And it's mixing all these different stuff. I mean,
It's
it's mixing all these different cultures, and
and a
uh,
retelling of Richard III from Shakespeare, and yes,
yeah, it's amazing. But to kind of give an example uh, of what I mean when I'm saying that stuff's happening off scene, or he's not spelling things out for you. There's at least one time I can remember where they're in this important diplomatic meeting. Uh, and they've talked about how important it is to be sharp and on your guard, and how important this meeting is. And about halfway through the meeting, people start like getting real emotional and almost losing control of themselves. And I think maybe they either knock somebody out and take them prisoner, or kill somebody that was like a visiting dignitary. And you're like, what just happened? And you find out later, or you finally figure out somebody cast a spell, but he doesn't. Somebody used magic on them during that meeting, and
right,
but you don't. He doesn't spell that out for you. You have to infer from what's going on. And sometimes the characters later will go, I think magic was at play, but then sometimes they won't, and you just have to figure it out for yourself. Um, so there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Uh, he tells you what's happening, he tells you what the characters are doing or what's going on at the time, but there's a lot that he just will not spell it out for you. And I actually I found a website. I think it was like a college student or something. I'd have to go find it again, but it was almost like a college level project where this person went like page by page through the Dragon Waiting and gave like historical footnotes and then their interpretation of what was going on, and it was really fascinating, really deep, and it really added a lot to my understanding. And it also was a good guide for me to understand how to read John M. Ford. Right, there's a lot more going on here. I gotta engage my brain a little bit more. So,
the annotations to a Mike Ford novel will be longer than the novel
oh
itself.
yeah, it's amazing. I was like, who this month? The reason I say it was a college kid because who else has time? I mean, it was like it was really in depth. So, but yeah, the Dragon Waiting, that one seems to get a lot of attention. Uh, you know, Neil Gaiman was like, if he had written a few more books in this world, he would have taken a traditional path to being this, huge, well-known, rich and successful author kind of thing. But again, John M. Ford was like, or Mike was like, this is what I want to write next. I don't want to write more there. I want to follow my nose over here and write a book. So,
Mike was um, Jim Rigney was able to provide support for Mike later in Mike's life, keeping him on retainer as a game design consultant, um, which was very helpful for Mike because um, Mike was a type 1 diabetic, which eventually was probably what did him in. He died of a heart attack. Uh, and yeah, his he wrote what he wanted to write, and he was never adequately recompensed for any of it. I mean, publishing houses, editors, publishers, others all tried their level best, but you know, fame and money were things that they didn't really matter to Mike. He just wanted to be creative in his own way, and we were all lucky enough to be there for it.
So, do you have any idea of what his writing process was like? Did he ever
Oh,
invite you in on any of that? Like, what was his writing process like?
his writing process was that, okay, so Mike was a night owl. He would get up roughly somewhere between noon and 2 in the afternoon, and I would end up. I mean, I was not the only one, but when we would get together, we would, I would take him around, run errands. He didn't drive, so I ended up being his transportation for, many things. And we'd usually grab coffee or, get a meal or something, or he'd come over to our house or we'd go and visit friends. But basically, we would end up spending some time together. Not every day, but certainly about once a week, maybe once every other week. And he would then, when other people were turning in about 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, is when he would start to work. And what he would do is he basically kept notes. He had a very distinctive kind of handwriting, and he almost calligraphy, not quite, but he would take notes for anything and everything, and there was no particular reason, I mean, in terms of focus, sometimes the muse would hit him about something else and he would write about that. And his notes, he would then later reference when he buckled down and started writing whatever project he was working on at the time. And he would do that until relatively early in the morning, like, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, and then he would go to bed. He's not the only writer I've known who's done something like that. Steve Sterling, SM Sterling, when I knew Steve many years ago, back when he lived in Toronto, Steve and his then wife were, she was an attorney, and Steve was beginning to be a successful writer. And in their situation, they would have breakfast in the morning, and then Steve would go to bed while his wife would go to work. Steve would wake up around dinner time, well, before dinner time, make dinner. His wife would come home. They'd have dinner together, they'd spend the evening together. She would go to bed, and he would start to work. That, in that regard, I know a fair number of writers who are night owls, and Mike was definitely one of them. Oh, and he would always have the Weather Channel on most of the time. He said he liked the plot.
Okay. So, I mean, I feel like reading The Dragon Waiting that he had to do extensive research on that time period, because it felt so. I mean, like, do you know how much research he was doing, or like, I mean,
One of the ways in which Mike would do research is that he would, if he did this for quite a few years, I don't know for how long, but one of the things that he would do is he would take as much as he could, like a week or two, and fly to London. See, Mike grew up. He was His family owned a pharmacy in, I think, Whiting, Indiana. Mike grew up. He told me at one point that he could see 9 oil refineries out his bedroom window. And he ended up wanting to bust out of that pretty early. He was an early admit to Indiana University, where he got involved with the Society for Creative Anachronism, and also became aware of, got involved with gaming, wargaming, and D&D. But later on, he would fly when he moved originally to New York and then to Philadelphia, and I'm getting my story confused here. But from New York to Philadelphia and then eventually out to the Twin Cities. But particularly when he lived out on the East Coast, he would fly to London. There, I'm getting to the point. He would fly to London and he would just go to the West End and watch and consume immense amounts of theater and go to the V&A and to the British Library, the British Museum. I don't know if he ever really spent an awful lot of time in Oxford at the Bodleian. That wouldn't surprise me at all to find out that he had. But yeah, he was also he put together a fund of money to assist the Minneapolis Public Library, which was his other main source of material. And so he was more than capable of doing lots and lots of very, very in-depth research on almost any topic.
All right. So, I mean, and that shows, like, especially in the Dragon Waiting, just the, because I imagine it's, when you do historical fiction, especially if you add fantasy elements to it, I imagine it's easier to break somebody's willing suspension of disbelief than a pure fantasy, because, these are established events that you're weaving in and out of, right? So people who already know those events, I would say, were probably easier to go, okay, no, this is wrong, or and it just kind of takes them out of the story. But anyway, Dragon Waiting is, I recommend it to anybody. Would you say it's the best book that's the introduction to his work, or what would you recommend?
I think it depends on what it is that you would find of interest. If you are deep into historical, alternate history, fantasy, yeah, the Dragon Waiting is great. If you want to see something, a kind of a Bildungsroman, the whole idea of a coming of age story, I would recommend Growing Up Weightless, which is it's an interesting book. It's set on the moon, in the future, and a young man. And Mike told me about where he wanted to take that story. He had sequels teed up for Growing Up Weightless that he wanted to write.
Well, I know at least one of his books got published posthumously or posthumously as Aspects.
Aspects, yes. The first 8 chapters of Aspects, if I recall correctly.
Didn't Neil Gaiman help with that, or wasn't he? Didn't he kind of help get that book out? I think he did, but
well, it was unfinished when Mike died, which is just a tremendous loss to all of us, because Aspects was the big blockbuster fantasy novel that would have made Mike's career. I'm utterly not kidding about it. Mike had this vision for, I don't even know what to call it. Steampunk doesn't even half begin to cover it. Aspects is a book about a different world. It is in as large a scope as the Dragon Waiting, and yet larger.
Wow. Yeah, because Dragon Waiting is large in scope, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, come on. it's a world where the Byzantine Empire doesn't fall, where the there's no particular survival of Christianity per se, and you have uh, strange things going on with. You might say, but how does this pass the butterfly test? That here are these characters that we know. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. Just keep reading. It's fine. They'll make sense in this world as well as ours, right?
Yeah, it's like it unfolds, but it unfolds with all of that other stuff in the backdrop, and that influences how things unfold.
Yeah. But if you wanted his short fiction, there's his two anthologies. There's the from the end of the 20th century from the New England Science Fiction Association Press, NESFA Press, and then the Heat of Fusion and Other Stories from Tor Books. And if you just want the Star Trek stuff, there's the two Star Trek novels.
Yeah, Final Reflection, How Much for Just the Planet. It looks like he's also got a couple of he's got at least one poetry collection called Time Steps.
Time Steps from Rune Press. Yeah, we put that together. Rune Press is the sometime publishing arm of the Minnesota Science Fiction Society.
So his bibliography here, I'll throw out a couple more things just to give people an idea of the variety of genres, I guess he was writing in, types of stories.
He's also responsible for quite possibly the most amazing, legendary short adventure for Traveler,
which is
Roadshow.
Okay.
Roadshow.
What makes it legendary? Just because it's so good?
The player characters are invited to apply for a job that they're not told about what it exactly involves, but they go through a vetting process that would make Emperor Strephon's security services green with envy. And it turns out that what the player characters have been hired to do is to be roadies for the most popular 3V media music sensation in the Third Imperium, the group known as Veedback.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And it's this sketch of what is an entire Traveler campaign in seemingly less than 5,000 words. I have no idea how he did it, but Roadshow for Traveler players is considered like we only wish we could run that campaign.
Right.
I'll
have to look it up.
Because and he wrote a number of other ones. I mean,
yeah, he's mentioned in here as being a writer. See, it's odd because the list I'm looking at, like it lists all these other things individually, but then it just says work for Traveler. Right. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's like somebody in Wikipedia needs to go back and do some more work.
Right.
So there's got to be enough people out there. And he also wrote, the alternate history comic book Captain Confederacy. That was something that Emma Bull and Will Shetterly, Emma and Will worked on.
Who published that? Do you know what?
Captain Confederacy came out from Emma Bull and Will Shetterly, and I'm trying to remember the name of the press that they had for that. But it was basically indie comic, and amongst those of us who knew Mike, especially those of us who were gaming with Mike, the comment basically got traded back and forth about just how much was happening under the surface of the water. We would end up looking at one another. We are talking about the guy who wrote issue number 10, Driving North of Captain Confederacy. Okay. As a just a signpost for there's more going on here than you can possibly imagine.
Right. So it says it tells the story of a superhero created for propaganda purposes in a world in which the Confederate States of America won their independence. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure he had fun with that.
Yeah. Mike was also responsible for introducing Len and myself to Jim Rigney.
Who was Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan. Earlier. Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of an off the wall question, but obviously Mike, John M. Ford was a character of characters.
Yep.
They broke the mold.
Yep.
Uh,
We did.
Another character out there in science fiction world, although he would, I think, nail your head to a desk if you said science. He was the science fiction writer. If I got the quote right, was Harlan Ellison. Do you know if John M. Ford and Harlan Ellison ever mixed and talked or anything?
They knew about one another. I don't think that they, I'm pretty sure that's not a close association. Harlan Ellison was a special guest at the World Fantasy Convention that I helped run, and I'm trying to remember, it was 92 or 93 in the Twin Cities, and where I had a chance to meet. Shake hands with is about the closest I could have gotten in that sense. But Ellison, that's also where Ellison gave a very interesting speech at that World Fantasy Award banquet, where he talked about how his work had been picked up by somebody who was involved with mainstream literature, and the editor had wanted Ellison to know. And now, mind you, this is like Ellison is in his 60s at this point,
right?
Something like that. That Ellison's story was going to be included in Year's Best Fiction, Year's Best American Fiction, and that his work was really good, and that they needed new young writers like him. Which Ellison thought was the funniest answer that he had ever been told.
Because he's like 60.
60.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Glad you know what I was doing before,
Ellison's a nut. Sometimes I'm like, was that really necessary for you to say that, Harlan? But he's a nut. He's a character.
Well, Ellison also did something that was really kind of striking at that World Fantasy Award. He was presented with a Lifetime Achievement World Fantasy Award at that awards banquet, and Gene Wolfe walked up to him, and by the way, another part of what fed into this was that we had all been working on running the 4th Street Fantasy Convention for several years up until that point. I joined a little bit later on with that organizing group, but we did that to prep for doing the World Fantasy Convention. But Gene walked up to Harlan, and I was just off to the side, and Gene basically said to Harlan, that's really great. I hope I could get something like that sometime. And Harlan stopped dead in his tracks and said, Gene, you don't have a World Fantasy Award? And Gene said, no, I haven't got one. And Harlan was like, this is yours. And just hand it, it's like, no, they've done it wrong. If I've gotten it before you, they're not paying attention to the right things. I mean, he was absolutely adamant about that. And Gene basically said, no, really, it's okay. And, but 3 years later, I think Gene did get a World Fantasy Award.
Did get the award.
Yeah.
Yeah, Harlan was, and I know we're here to talk about John M. Ford, aka Mike, as you knew him. But he was a man of extremes.
Yes.
He could be like, wow, I can't believe you just said that. And then he could be like, wow, Harlan, I can't believe you just said that. It's like you never knew which Harlan you were going to get when he opened his mouth. But he had strong opinions.
Well, the thing about Mike Ford, and so let me use that depiction of Harlan for a moment.
Sure.
Mike he had what could best be described as a chosen family of close friends who really cared about him. And so the thing that Mike never, ever, ever wanted to do was to do anything or say anything that would make somebody that he cared about upset. And it was, one of the things that he worked very hard at was being a good friend, even when people were, all distracted by all sorts of other So, yeah, in comparison to various other people that I knew at the time and have known since, Mike was the sort of fellow who wanted to make sure that he remembered your birthday. I actually have a dice box that Mike made for me.
Oh, that's that. I've never had somebody make me a dice box. That's nice.
It's Mike never had an awful lot of money. That's why he wrote Christmas cards. We'd get together sometime in December and he would have figured out what he was going to do. And these weren't just cards. They were, you know, there was, was it Troy the musical, if I recall correctly, was one thing. I mean, he just would prepare these things that were short works of creative energy. And we'd go to Kinko's, if anybody remembers Kinko's, and he'd print up about 100 of these, and he'd send them out to his friends.
And again, he actually won an award, a World Fantasy Award, I think it was,
for Winter Solstice Camelot Station. Yeah.
So, do you have, just remembering him now that he's gone? Do you have a happiest memory of him? Like any instance that's like just stands out to you as like the quintessential Mike moment with your friendship?
I do. I've written a little bit about this before. Mike introduced me to the amazing tour de force fantasy computer game Darklands.
Oh, Darklands, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I've actually done an episode about Darklands.
Yeah, Darklands.
Very, very historically accurate German perspective.
Yeah, there's an interesting aspect about that I'll mention in a moment. But Mike introduced us to Darklands. And what we would do is Lynn and I would go over to his apartment. He lived in South Minneapolis, in the Lindale neighborhood. No, wait, Whittier. Yeah, Whittier. 22nd and Garfield. You can go look it up. And we would go to his apartment and order pizza and ended up we would play Darklands. He would play and the thing that you might think it's just a computer game. Well, Mike also was interested in music. Oh, by the way, we haven't even talked about this. He had a big interest in music and music composition, and he had a Roland MT32 sound synthesizer. Mm. And Darklands was notable for having this soundtrack that used MIDI files that were written specifically for a Roland Sound Canvas or an MT32. And so we would sit there in the winter and the snow would be falling outside and we'd be listening to this ethereal period music in this computer game that was astounding for its time. And he would run the game and we would sit and play as his players.
Oh, wow.
And, sometime 1, 2 in the morning, we'd, realize that, we had other things we needed to do. I had work, Lynn had work. And we'd, bundle ourselves back up and, say goodnight to Mike and go back out to our cars and drive into our car and drive home. And, that, I wouldn't change that for anything.
Yeah, that sounds like wonderful. That's a wonderful memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's, yeah. I'm kind of basking in that. And I wasn't even there. That was nice.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Yeah. Is there anything? I think that might be a good note to end on. Is there anything else that you want to add? And
We've only covered a very, very small fraction of everything that made Mike amazing. And he was gone too soon.
yeah.
As you can probably gather from what I've talked with you about, like I said, I've been fortunate in knowing a lot of people who, in various ways, left a mark in this world, for the creatively, right? Okay. Mike was amazing. And there's been no one like him, and there will be no one like him. And we are all very lucky for what he was able to share with us.
Nice. But, normally I end on a bad joke of the week, but in honor of all that, I'm not going to. I picked out some Klingon related stuff, but that's such a lovely picture. I just want to go out on the thought of just, it's late at night, the snow's falling outside the window. You guys are just hanging out with your friend Mike, and he's taking you through the game of Darklands, and you're the characters, and just that timeless late night moment with your friend Mike. I think that's probably a good note to end on. So, Victor, thanks so much for sharing your memories of Mike with us. I wish I'd have met him. I can't tell you how much I wish I would have met him. What a guy, what a character.
Yeah.
What a character. And I've enjoyed stuff of reading of his. I'm going to keep reading, everything I can get my hands on. Thank you for going out of your way to introduce him to me. Not only the books that you gave me to read, but these memories and everything you just shared.
Now, when you mentioned that you had an interest, I was like, we can help you with that. I can be a book pusher on this one. First one's free. No.
Yeah, the first one's free. All right. Okay, well, I think that's a good note to end on. Victor, thanks so much for your time. People, go check out John M. Ford. Check out his books. You will not be disappointed. And that's just, as Victor said, it's just a small slice of who he was as a person, but the books and his writings are, the legacy we have. So check him out, John M. Ford.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody else, we will catch you next time on Shame Plays.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Shame Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shameplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shameplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shame Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/shameplays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.